In this presentation, we will briefly cover some of the key characteristics of American literary realism. First, I want to make sure that you understand this term, verisimilitude. You will encounter this quite a bit in the writings of William Dean Howells, as well as in scholarly essays on the text that we are reading. Verisimilitude is a noun that means the appearance of being true or real, and this is what realist literature aims to show, verisimilitude. In American literature, the term realism encompasses the period of time from the Civil War to the turn of the century, during which writers like William Dean Howells, Rebecca Harding Davis, Henry James, Mark Twain, and others wrote fiction devoted to accurate representation and an exploration of American lives in various contexts. As the United States grew rapidly after the Civil War, increasing rates of democracy and literacy, the rapid growth in industrialization and urbanization, an expanding population base due to immigration, and a relative rise in middle-class affluence provided a fertile literary environment for readers interested in understanding these rapid shifts in culture. In drawing attention to this connection, Amy Kaplan has called realism a strategy for imagining and managing threats of social change. Now we are going to address some of the features of literary realism. We've already talked about how realism aims to reflect life in warts and all, in its truest, most essential form. So realist literature is aiming to do for life in written form what photographs do for life in a visual form. It's supposed to be a mirror of reality. And because of that, in a realist text, you are often going to encounter very detailed descriptions of what people wore, of the expressions on their faces, of how the tea table is set, all of that kind of stuff. So if you are a person who is bored by a lot of detail, just, gird your loins, as they say, and get ready to bear it. The next feature that you will encounter is the importance of character over action and plot. Authors such as Henry James in particular were really interested in the psychology of their characters, what their thought processes were, how they reacted to others, what they thought about things. So often you will get more detail about what characters are thinking and how they're reacting to others in other situations, as opposed to a lot of action. Front and center in realist texts are ethical decisions, this idea that we have free will. So the conflicts in realist novels often arise in response to a moral dilemma that the character has to respond to or solve. Characters often appear real in their complexity, behavior, and motives. So you're not going to get characters with superpowers. In other words, they're ordinary, everyday people. A person of the middle class will act in accordance with middle class virtues. Characters who live in poverty will react according to their environment, as we'll see in Stephen Crane's Maggie, a Girl of the Streets. And that's connected to the next point. Characters appear natural in relation to each other and their circumstances. There's also an emphasis on the importance of economic and social class, especially the kind of maintenance of middle class interests. And when we talk about middle class interests, we're talking about kind of like conventional morality. So, keeping a tight rein on sexuality, especially the expression of sexuality in women. Values such as honesty and a belief in God and things like that. When we get to naturalism, as we'll see in the work of Stephen Crane, the focus shifts from the middle class to the lower classes. The next point is plausible logical events. So for the most part, the events that occur in these texts are things that could happen in everyday life. They tend not to be overly sensational or dramatic, although we'll see in the works of Pauline Hopkins, for example, there is a bit of drama there. But for the most part, these texts tend to focus on normal everyday occurrences. There is also an emphasis on dialect, so natural speech patterns among characters in terms of diction and vernacular. So you may find some passages in Twain, for example, in Stephen Crane, in Charles Chestnut, where all of a sudden the characters aren't speaking what we would consider standard English. No, their words are being reproduced the way that they would sound if spoken. So if people have accents, if they speak in a particular regional dialect or use slang, that is going to be reproduced in the text. So when you get to these passages, I encourage you to sound the words out aloud so you can get a feel for the voices of the characters. And finally, the presence of an objective and impartial narration of the story. So again, there's not a lot of flowery language. It's straightforward and to the point.